55%, more than half of an entire country, erased from the map with a single signature. In 1848, Mexico lost a territory larger than all of Western Europe, more than 500,000 square kilometers, all at once. California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, parts of Wyoming, Kansas, and Oklahoma. All of that was once Mexico. All of it was torn away. And the most disturbing part is not the size of the loss. It is how it happened. This is the reality of one of the greatest territorial amputations the world has ever seen. To understand what happened, you need to go back a few decades. In 1821, Mexico won its independence from Spain. It was an immense country. Its territory stretched from what is now Guatemala all the way to Oregon. It covered deserts, mountains, coastlines on the Pacific and the Gulf. It was a nation with enormous potential. But there was a problem. Mexico was young, fragile, unstable. Between 1821 and 1846, the country went through more than 50 changes of government, 50 in 25 years. Presidents came and went like the seasons. Military coups became routine, and while the politics crumbled from within, a threat was growing from the outside. To the north, the United States was growing like a machine, building railroads, expanding factories, opening roads to the west. Settlers were advancing over indigenous lands without stopping. The American population doubled every 25 years. The hunger for territory was insatiable, and they had a plan. That plan had a name: Manifest Destiny. It was the belief that Americans had the divine right to expand their borders from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It was not just an idea, it was a state policy, and the man who turned that idea into reality was named James Knox Polk. Elected president in 1844, Polk had an obsession. He wanted the West, he wanted Texas, he wanted California, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get them. But wait, there's something almost no one talks about regarding this part. Texas had already been a problem for years. In 1835, American settlers living in Mexican Texas revolted against the central government. They declared independence in 1836. Mexico never recognized that separation, never accepted it. It considered Texas to be Mexican territory occupied by foreigners. For nearly 10 years, Texas existed as an independent republic, a country without full recognition, an open wound between two nations. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas. For Mexico, that was an act of war. The tension exploded, and the border became the fuse. Mexico said the Texas border was the Nueces River. The Americans insisted it was the Rio Grande. A strip of land more than 200 kilometers wide separated the two positions. No one would yield. The strip between the two rivers was a dangerous void. No law, no clear government. A no-man's land that would become the pivot of a continental war. And this is where it gets interesting. Polk tried diplomacy first. He sent John Slidell to Mexico with an offer, $25 million for California and New Mexico. On top of that, the United States would assume the debts Mexico owed to American citizens. The Mexican government refused. It did not even want to receive Slidell. For Mexico, selling territory was an unthinkable humiliation. For Polk, the refusal was exactly what he had hoped for. Polk knew exactly what he was doing. In January of 1846, he ordered General Zachary Taylor to move his troops to the Rio Grande, disputed territory, land that Mexico considered its own. It was a calculated provocation, and it worked. In April, Mexican soldiers attacked an American patrol in the disputed zone. They killed about a dozen men. Polk had what he wanted, a justification. On May 13th of 1846, the American Congress declared war. Polk told the country that Mexico had invaded American territory and shed American blood on American soil. It was a lie, but it worked. Pay close attention to this part. The war that followed was devastating. Not for the Americans, for the Mexicans. The United States Army was smaller, but infinitely more prepared. It had light artillery mounted on carriages pulled by trained horses. It could be moved quickly across the battlefield. Mexico was using British muskets from the Napoleonic era, weapons from a previous generation. The technological gap was brutal. The Americans attacked on 4 fronts at the same time: northern Mexico, New Mexico, California, and the center of the country. At the Battle of Palo Alto in May of 1846, 2,200 Americans faced more than 3,000 Mexicans. The result was an American victory with only 5 dead. The artillery dominated everything. The Mexicans attempted a desperate charge at sunset. It made no difference. At the Battle of Monterrey in September of the same year, the fighting was fiercer. Hand-to-hand combat in the streets of the city. 3 days of carnage, 367 Mexicans dead, 120 Americans. Taylor took the city and declared an 8-week ceasefire. Polk was furious. He wanted more. But what comes next changes everything. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, the man who had already lost Texas, the general who was defeated at the Battle of San Jacinto in 1836. He returned to power in Mexico in December of 1846, and there was something no one expected. Polk had made a secret deal with Santa Anna before the war. He allowed him to return from exile in Cuba. The idea was that Santa Anna would negotiate peace and sell the northern territories. Santa Anna accepted the offer. He crossed American lines. He returned to Mexico, and he immediately betrayed Polk. Instead of negotiating, he took command of the Mexican army and marched against the Americans. At the Battle of Buena Vista in February of 1847, Santa Anna gathered 15,000 soldiers. The Americans had 4,600, mostly inexperienced men. Volunteers who had never seen real combat. The battle lasted 2 days. The terrain was rough, deep ravines, narrow passages. Santa Anna believed numerical superiority would be enough. It was not. American artillery devastated the Mexican lines. Mexico suffered around 3,000 casualties. The Americans held with far fewer losses. Santa Anna retreated, but he did not admit defeat. He sent messages to the government saying he had won. The truth came later, and there is more. Meanwhile, General Winfield Scott was preparing a second offensive, the most audacious one, an amphibious invasion. In March of 1847, more than 10,000 American soldiers landed near Veracruz. It was the largest amphibious landing in the Americas up to that point. Warships lined up along the coast, cannons pointed at the city. Scott besieged Veracruz. He bombarded it for 20 days. Civilians died, buildings collapsed, the city surrendered, and Scott began marching toward Mexico City, 500 kilometers inland, cutting his own supply lines, a decision many considered suicidal. He followed virtually the same path that Hernán Cortés had taken 300 years earlier when he invaded the Aztec Empire. The coincidence was not accidental. It was symbolic. Santa Anna tried to stop him at Cerro Gordo. He gathered nearly 17,000 men. Scott destroyed them. At Churubusco, 8,500 Americans faced a force possibly 3 times their size, and won again. With each battle, the Mexican army fell back. With each defeat, the country fractured further. Now comes the part that few people know. In September of 1847, American forces reached the gates of Mexico City. The last obstacle was Chapultepec Castle, a fortress atop a hill 60 meters high, and inside it was Mexico's military academy. General Nicolas Bravo received orders to defend the castle. Santa Anna promised 2,000 soldiers. He sent 832. Most of them were National Guard. They were not regular troops. Among the defenders were cadets, students, teenagers. When it became clear that the battle was lost, Bravo ordered the retreat. 6 cadets refused. They were between 13 and 19 years old. Francisco Marquez, 13, Juan de la Barrera, 19, Vicente Suarez, 14, Fernando Montes de Oca, 18, Agustin Melgar, 18, Juan Escutia, 19. They stayed, they fought, and they died. Vicente Suarez was killed in hand-to-hand combat at his sentry post. He shot one invader, he stabbed another with his bayonet, and he fell right there. Agustin Melgar was severely wounded inside the castle. He died the next day. And Juan Escutia, legend says he wrapped himself in the Mexican flag and leapt from the top of the castle so that the flag would not fall into enemy hands. That episode was engraved in Mexico's memory forever. The Niños heroes, the boy heroes. Every September 13th, the President of Mexico places a wreath at the monument erected in Chapultepec. 100 years after the battle in 1947, American President Harry Truman visited the memorial. He placed a wreath and said a phrase that echoed in both countries. Brave men do not belong to any one country. Mexico City fell in September of 1847, but the war did not end there. The Mexican government fled to Querétaro. The Americans occupied the capital for more than 4 months, and the negotiations began. That is why the next fact is so important. The American negotiator was named Nicholas Trist. He was a State Department official. Polk sent him to accompany Scott's army, but when the negotiations took too long, Polk lost his patience. He ordered Trist to come back. And here, something extraordinary happened. Trist refused. He disobeyed a direct order from the president. He believed Washington did not understand the situation in Mexico, that if he lost that chance, the consequences would be terrible for both countries. In a letter to his wife, dated December 4th of 1847, Trist wrote that the decision was entirely his own. He stayed, and he negotiated the treaty on his own. On February 2nd of 1848, in the village of Guadalupe Hidalgo, north of Mexico City, the treaty was signed. Mexico ceded 55% of its territory, more than 525,000 square miles. California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, most of Arizona and Colorado, parts of Wyoming, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Texas was officially recognized as American territory. The Rio Grande became the border. In return, the United States paid $15 million. $15 million. For an area larger than France, Germany, Italy, and Spain combined. It was like buying a continent for the price of a farm. The American Senate ratified the treaty by 34 votes to 14, but not without controversy. Article 10, which guaranteed the protection of Mexican land grants in the ceded territories, was eliminated. Mexican families who had lived on those lands for centuries lost their properties. Overnight, Mexicans became Americans. Or rather, they became foreigners in their own land. That explains a lot, but it does not explain the main thing. Why did Mexico accept? The answer is simple and brutal. It had no choice. The army was destroyed, the capital occupied, the government fragmented. There was separatism in the Yucatan, revolts in several states. Some politicians in Mexico City itself advocated for the total annexation of Mexico by the United States. The entire country was on the verge of collapse. Signing the treaty meant losing half the country. Not signing could have meant losing everything, and the irony does not end there. 9 days before the treaty was signed. Just 9 days. On January 24th of 1848, a man named James Marshall found gold nuggets at Sutter's Mill in California. Mexico ceded California without knowing it was sitting on one of the largest gold reserves on the planet. Months later, the news spread. In December of that year, President Polk officially confirmed the discovery. The gold rush began. In 1849, more than 100,000 people migrated to California. The population of San Francisco jumped from 500 people to more than 150,000 in just 5 years. California became a state in 1850. Wealth that had been Mexican went on to finance American expansion. But wait, there is something no one talks about. The loss of territory did not end in 1848. 5 years later, in 1853, the United States came back. Ambassador James Gadsden was sent to Mexico to buy more land. Santa Anna was in power again. He desperately needed money to fund his army and contain rebellions. Gadsden proposed a series of offers. The largest was $50 million for all of Baja California and a large portion of northern Mexico. Santa Anna refused, but he could not refuse everything. On December 30th of 1853, he sold another 30,000 square miles. What is now southern Arizona and New Mexico, for $10 million. That transaction became known as the Gadsden Purchase. In Mexico, it is called the Sale of the Mesilla, and it established the definitive border between the two countries. The same border that exists to this day. The consequences were profound for both sides and for the world. For Mexico, the defeat was an earthquake. Not just territorial, psychological. A nation that had won its independence only 27 years earlier watched half of itself disappear. The shame was collective. Generals blamed politicians. Politicians blamed generals. The people blamed everyone. Santa Anna, the man who had lost Texas in 1836 and now lost half the country, was expelled from power, exiled. But he would return once more, as he always did. The country plunged into an identity crisis. Military and political leaders blamed each other. The instability that had existed before the war became total chaos. In 1857, a civil war erupted. The Reform War divided the country between liberals and conservatives, and before the dust had even settled, France invaded in 1862. It installed a European emperor on the throne of Mexico. Maximilian of Habsburg ruled until 1867, when he was captured and executed by firing squad. They were decades of torment, all connected in some way to that wound of 1848. But there was something unexpected. The defeat also ignited a flame. A new generation of leaders emerged. Men like Benito Juarez, who unified the country, expelled the French invaders, and laid the foundations of modern Mexico. The humiliation became fuel for reconstruction. For the United States, the conquest also came at a cost. The enormous territory acquired from Mexico reopened a wound that was already infected: slavery. Each new territory raised the same question: would it be free or slave? The Missouri Compromise of 1820 had established a fragile balance between North and South. The Mexican acquisition destroyed that balance. The Wilmot Proviso tried to ban slavery in the new territories. It was rejected. The Compromise of 1850 tried to accommodate both sides. It failed. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 set the debate on fire. 13 years after the war with Mexico, the United States went to war with itself. The American Civil War. Many of the generals who had fought in Mexico faced each other again. This time, on opposite sides: Ulysses Grant, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson. All had served in the invasion of Mexico. Grant, who would become president, wrote years later that he considered the war against Mexico one of the most unjust ever waged by a strong nation against a weak one. Think about what that means. The total casualties of the war were devastating. Around 25,000 Mexicans killed, including possibly 1,000 civilians. On the American side, approximately 13,000 dead. But the most shocking statistic is this: out of every 7 American deaths, only 1 was in combat. The other 6 were from disease: dysentery, yellow fever, malaria. The deadliest enemy of American soldiers was not the Mexican army. It was nature itself. Journalists who accompanied the troops sent detailed reports back to the newspapers, and what they described was disturbing. American soldiers committed atrocities against Mexican civilians. Looting, murder, gratuitous violence, discipline among the volunteers was nearly non-existent. Many deserted. The St. Patrick's Battalion, formed by Irish Catholic immigrants who deserted the American army to fight alongside Mexico, became one of the most controversial chapters of the war. They fought with ferocity. They were captured. Many were hanged as traitors. In Mexico, they are remembered as heroes. Now that you understand this, let us move to something even more striking. The legacy of this conflict is everywhere. The names of cities tell the truth. Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, San Antonio, Sacramento, Santa Fe, Las Vegas, El Paso. They are names in Spanish because those cities were founded by Mexicans, by Spaniards, by communities who lived there long before any American arrived. The streets, the churches, the missions, the plazas. Everything carries the mark of a presence that was erased from the political map, but never from the actual landscape. And there is more. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo promised to protect the rights of Mexicans who remained in the ceded territories. Article 8 guaranteed American citizenship to anyone who stayed for more than 1 year. Article 9 promised protection of property and civil rights. But in practice, those promises were systematically broken. Mexican families who had owned land along the Rio Grande for generations were gradually pushed out. Anglo-American farmers and ranchers took control of the region. The land grants that the Mexican government had given to its citizens were ignored by American courts. This is exactly what you need to understand. 178 years later, the border between Mexico and the United States remains one of the most heavily patrolled on the planet. Thousands of kilometers of fences, barbed wire, sensors, and patrols. A line drawn by war, a division that did not exist before 1848. When the immigration debate heats up, rarely does anyone mention that the border came to the people, not the other way around. Entire communities woke up one day and discovered that the country had changed around them, without them having moved a single centimeter. In Mexico, the war is remembered with pain. Monuments, murals, national holidays. September 13th is commemorated in every school in the country. Children learn the names of the Niños heroes before they learn their multiplication tables. In the United States, that same war is frequently forgotten, overshadowed by the Civil War that came after, treated as a footnote, a quick passage in textbooks, but the consequences are permanent. California became the most powerful economy of any American state. If it were an independent country, it would have the 5th largest economy in the world. Nevada houses Las Vegas. Colorado became a technology hub. Arizona grew in the desert. Utah prospered. All of that on land that was Mexican until the middle of the 19th century. The territory lost by Mexico became the economic heart of the modern United States. And Mexico? It was left with half of what it had, devastated, impoverished, but standing, and with something that no treaty can take away: memory, identity, the certainty that it was once greater, and the determination to never be so vulnerable again. Today, more than 35 million people of Mexican origin live in the United States. Many of them in the very territories Mexico lost. They speak Spanish. They cook tortillas. They celebrate the Day of the Dead. They carry with them the culture of a country that never truly left those lands. The border divided the map, but it did not divide the people, not completely. The sun sets over the border once more. The same land, the same mountains, the same rivers that flowed when there was no line on the map at all. On one side, a superpower. On the other, a country that learned to rebuild itself after losing nearly everything. The wound of 1848 has never fully healed. Perhaps it never will, because some borders are drawn with ink and others with blood. This one was drawn with both. And those who look at the map today rarely ask themselves how it came to have that shape, rarely question why California speaks English, why New Mexico is in the United States, why the Rio Grande is a dividing line and not simply a river. The answers are all in 1848, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, in the war that produced it, and in the choices that shaped two countries forever.